Iceland, the land of the midnight sun, is a place where light and dark wage a geological war. But near Reykjavik, far from the tourist paths, lies a place where the darkness achieved a chilling, final victory. It is the abandoned Museum of Contemporary Anomalies, Project Umbra, a massive, brutalist concrete structure built into a remote geothermal complex in the 1980s. The entire area is shrouded in an inexplicable perpetual twilight, even during the peak of summer light. Curator Freyja Jónsdóttir, whose family had deep, unspoken ties to the facility, inherited the usage rights. Ignoring the local warnings and the official records that cited geothermal instability as the reason for closure, she sought to understand the legacy. The external atmosphere was oppressive. The sky above the complex was a perpetual, starless night, even when the rest of Iceland experienced daylight. The only illumination came from the unnatural, faint steam and condensation rising from the geothermal vents, a ghostly, ambient glow. Freyja entered the facility through a broken ventilation shaft, descending into a network of cold, concrete corridors where the fluorescent lights flickered violently, struggling against an unseen, powerful resistance. The air was thick with geothermal steam and the chilling, physical pressure of a great absence. The museum was not a collection of artifacts. It was a vast, empty containment facility. The walls were lined with empty, dark velvet display cases, and the main exhibit hall was dominated by a single, terrifying object. In the center of the hall stood a perfectly smooth, massive matte black stone pedestal. The pedestal itself was not merely dark. It was a perfect void, absorbing all light with terrifying efficiency. It generated a highly localized, perpetual field of absolute darkness. This field was not the absence of light. It was its active consumer. Project Umbra's single, massive exhibit was a singularity of night. The facility was trapped in an eternal night, where the simple physics of light were fundamentally inverted. Freyja quickly established her lab outside the main hall, relying on highly shielded, low-frequency infrared light. She began to analyze the surviving files of the original 1980s research team, led by Dr. Alistair Kjellson. Kjellson's final log entries detailed the purpose of the pedestal. It was an artifact discovered deep in a lava tube, a piece of pre-human geometry that operated on anti-photonic principles. The facility was built not to study it, but to archive the consequences of its darkness. The most disturbing evidence was the photographic archive. Kjellson's team had taken hundreds of photos of the pedestal and the room over the years. The older photos showed a normal, brightly lit room, but the shadows in the images were unnaturally dense, elongated, and slightly blurred, as if they possessed kinetic energy. Kjellson's theory was simple and terrifying. The pedestal was so effective at consuming photons that the shadows cast by the Null-Light were not static. They were the accumulated, concentrated darkness of everything the field had ever consumed. Every moment of night, every shadow of every scientist, every absence of light was condensed into these shadows. The shadows were the physical memory of the darkness. They were not mere absence. They were an entity. Freyja realized that the exhibit hall was lined with empty cases because the original scientists archived their most successful catch, a container full of shadows. The physical environment around the pedestal began to react. Fine dust and frost on the floor were actively being pulled toward the pedestal, as if the darkness possessed a localized, subtle gravitational pull. The phenomenon escalated. Freyja discovered that the laws of physics were subtly warping around the museum. She placed a simple light meter on the floor near the pedestal. Its digital display began violently flickering, registering an impossible negative light reading, LUM. The field was not zeroing the light. It was pulling the energy of light into a reverse spectrum. She observed a thin, metallic object near the pedestal. It cast two shadows. One correct, static shadow fixed by her lab light, and a second, much darker shadow that was unnaturally detached from the object, standing upright and stretching aggressively toward the nearest light source. This second shadow was the living shadow, the condensed darkness of the entity, attempting to escape the confines of the null-light and consume true light. Freyja's cognitive function began to break down. The constant, physical pressure of the darkness warped her sense of perspective and depth. She began to perceive the negative space, the shadows and the empty corners, as more substantial than the physical objects. She found herself subconsciously speaking in the logic of the dark, using negation to describe everything. The wall is not white. It is the unpresence of blackness. Kjelson's final, almost illegible journal entry detailed the entity's plan. It feeds on contrast. The longer the sun shines outside, the more contrast the field consumes, and the stronger the entity becomes. The museum is a trap. We are trapped with the pure, distilled darkness of history. It is waiting for the perfect solar event, a solar eclipse, to achieve full power and escape. The original scientists, realizing their mistake, had tried to bury the structure deep under the Earth's crust using the geothermal vents. The facility was abandoned, but the entity remained, waiting. The entity was making its move. The concrete walls of the main hall were rapidly being consumed by the perpetual darkness field. The field was visibly spreading as a creeping, spreading stain of perfect blackness, actively consuming the fluorescent light tubes on the ceiling. The remaining light was violently strobing and flickering. The accumulated shadows in the room were beginning to cohere into dense, unmoving shapes, the unlived darkness of all time. Freyja's plan was desperate. She had to force the pedestal to release its stored antiphotonic energy rapidly, causing a massive, chaotic flare of light that would overload the system and neutralize the field. She located the pedestal's hidden maintenance access. The final containment protocol involved submerging the pedestal in highly charged saline solution, forcing an extreme, unstable photonic contrast. As she entered the main hall, the shadows were massive, moving, silent shapes. They were closing in. They were not fast, but their slow, inevitable movement was terrifying. They were drawn toward her body heat and the light of her headlamp, seeking to consume her illumination. The massive black pedestal was pulsing with an invisible, crushing energy. The accumulated shadows coalesced into a single, colossal, unmoving entity of pure blackness that filled the far end of the hall. The air was thick with the ozone of consumed light. Freyja fought through the crippling pressure, reaching the pedestal's release valve. She flooded the chamber with the saline solution. The contrast between the antiphotonic pedestal and the highly conductive, light-reflecting solution was immediate and catastrophic. The pedestal did not explode. It imploded. A silent, blinding flash of pure, intense white light erupted from the center of the pedestal, a massive, singular discharge of all the stored light the field had consumed over decades. The light was so intense it burned the shadows out of the corners of the room. The flash ended. The pedestal was reduced to a fine, gray powder. The museum was structurally intact, but the sense of perpetual night was gone. Freyja survived, rescued by her team who arrived shortly after the implosion. The perpetual night was gone. The threat was neutralized, but the singularity had achieved its final victory over its last witness. Freyja's cognitive function was permanently altered. She was no longer affected by shadows, but by light itself. The massive discharge of pure light had irrevocably damaged her brain's visual processing center. Whenever she looks at any source of strong light, the sun, a lamp, a clean white wall, she sees the memory of the shadows. The light reveals the shadows of things that are not there, or the dark outlines of events that never happened. The entity had failed to physically escape, but it had permanently infected her sight. She became a photographer, compelled to archive the shadows she sees. She takes pictures of brightly lit spaces, and the resulting photographs, captured through her damaged lens, reveal massive, sprawling black shapes, the compressed darkness of the perpetual night, frozen on the film. Freyja Jónsdóttir is now a woman condemned to see the infinite, terrifying potential of darkness in every ray of light. The ultimate horror of Project Umbra wasn't the night it created, but the darkness it forced her to see in the day.